Hello, welcome to the channel and thanks for watching, and in this video I'll take you through what I've done with the new Chaos Knights from the recent Chaos Knight army set. So on the left you're looking at the Knight Abominant, on the right you're looking at the War Dog done in the Stalker variant. Now I've done them to tie into my Nurgle army, and I'll show you what I've done through that process, including a little bit on the bases. Now these Knights I think we're going to see more and more popping up, especially the Knight Abominant, because I think this is by far and away the most powerful Knight that's in the game now, and also it's a really cool model. So recent codex has meant you can drop a Knight into any army, and if you do that it doesn't stop your Battleforge rules like it used to when you souped stuff together. The Abominant's ideal for this because it's got a real powerful main weapon, the Volkite Combuster, 6 shots, 30-inch range, strength 10, 3 damage, with the opportunity, if you wound on a 6, 3 mortal wounds go on top of that. Particularly devastating. Good in close combat because it's got its Electro Scourge that gives you 3 extra hit rolls for each one, so 9 attacks at its basic strength. Pretty powerful and effective. Added to that, you get psychic abilities. It's a bit of a no-brainer. It's a little bit overpowered at the moment, so probably going to get nerfed. So while you got the chance, get it into your army and give it a go with it. So I think we're going to see a lot more of these on the battlefield. So this is just, again, what I've done. So showing you the background there very quickly, just starting on my bases. I have got a video of how I do my Nurgle bases. I'll drop that below. But what I'm showing you there is just some Inquisition symbols that I've cast up using blue stuff from Green Stuff World. Again, I've got a video on that process to do that, and I'll link that down below. But I just think it's interesting, and especially with big models like this, to do something a little bit different on the bases, particularly for what's going to be a focal point here. So just taking some of these Inquisition castings, breaking them up, and I'm going to super glue them onto the base, and then we'll do some detailing around them. Now I don't go crazy on the bases of my Knights particularly, but just a little bit of extra detail, a little bit of extra effort rather than just the usual, sand and gravel. I think just lift it up a bit. Now you can go crazy and make some really cool scenic bases, which I do occasionally, but just this is showing you very briefly my method. Again, for more details, just check those links below. So going back onto the Knights, why have I built the Warlock Stalkers rather than the other War Dogs, or even I could have magnetised the arms? I don't particularly want to magnetise the arms in this case. I think the Warlock Stalkers are probably the most versatile and multi-purpose of the models. The chain cannon it comes with, 12 shots, 36-inch range, strength 6, only 1 damage, but good for clearing out infantry, and I'm doing a few infantry-based games soon, so this is why I've picked that kind of version. Now onto the actual build. First thing I'm going to do is a little bit of battle damage. I'm not going to the massive lengths that I've done on my recent Knight videos. If you've watched those, again, check them out. I'll drop a call below, or just subscribe to the channel and have a look. But I'm doing a little bit of damage because I think these are supposed to be 10,000-year-old killing machines. They're going to be a bit scuffed up. So drilling a few bullet holes or las impacts with a pin drill, and just using a hobby knife then to widen out that impact crater, or scoring down some of the armour panels. Now I'm not going crazy, I've not done this on every single panel, but just add a little bit to give a little bit more depth, and it also enables you to do some really cool nurgly effects later on if you drill some bullet holes in. Now that process of battle damaging I was doing while the bases were drying, and when you're doing big builds like this, it is kind of important to think about what you're going to do at what stage. So, trying to time it so you make best use of your hobby time. Because if you started just doing the bases and went, right, well, I'm not going to do anything else until I can finish the base off, you're going to have a lot of time while you're waiting for certain things to dry. Because if you were to do the PVAing you see in here to put the sand onto the base straight after you'd glue these pieces on, there's a chance there'll be a bit of super glue leaking out from the edge and you're going to wreck a brush. So just think about what stage you're going to do things in. Give things the time to set and finish off before you move on. So real simple bases, just banging some hobby sand on, and again leaving this to dry overnight, and getting on with something else while you're doing it. Now when the sand has dried, with these cast pieces, this is milliput casting of the Inquisition symbols from the St. Catherine model, as I said, and they're raised up a little bit, so we need to put a little bit more depth in there to not have such a stark contrast. So all I'm doing on here is taking some of the Games Workshop technical paint, Agrellan Earth, and this is a crackle paint, and painting it just into and under where that lip is, and then that will crack and give some really nice effects. And I've sprayed the models. I've done a black spray and a lead belcher over the top. I do this quite a lot. It's a great time-saving way of not having to waste tons and tons of time painting metal afterwards. It gives a real nice base effect, and I particularly love undercoating with metals. Now we're starting again with the Agrellan Earth again. We want the armour to look cracked and broken and damaged, so we're painting this onto lots of the armour panels in varying thicknesses, because then it gives you a slightly different texture and crack, no more than maybe 1 millimetre. So we've put that in clumps across the model. You could paint every last inch of every armour panel if you wanted, but little clumps just makes it a little bit interesting. You'll see there the nice cracked effect this has had. Now we need to try and blend this into the paintwork. So what we're going to do now is paint over this with the Death Guard green. When you're doing this, go carefully when you're painting it onto the flakes. If you press too hard on the Agrellan earth in the initial stages, you can flake it off. One or two flake off doesn't matter, but if you start flaking off massive chunks, there's almost no point putting that on there. Now, it does solidify and it will stick on, and you won't really lose too much of it once you've painted it and you've varnished it at the end, which I don't show in this video, but I always do varnish on models at the end, and it really just seals things in. So we're working now on the Death Guard green, painting that onto all the armour panels. When I'm doing it, if you miss bits, like around the edges of the trim, or even some edges on flat sections, or where you've drilled those bullet holes, if you miss those areas out, that works really well because it makes it look like rusty, kind of battered armour. So you need to be fairly good with your coverage, but not so good that you're not leaving any metal showing through, because particularly on Nurgle that we're doing here, that rusty effect's really nice. Again, in this video, I'm going to show you maybe on one or other of the knights, but I'm doing the same processes on all the knights here, working through all three. The benefit of that is batch paint is a little bit quicker, but also it means that the first coat will have dried when you come through to doing the next coat. Whether that's being a coat of a different paint, so you're not going to intermingle them, or whether you do need to do a second coat of your base layer, and sometimes you will. You need to do a couple of thin coats, always works better. Now, I paint off a wet palette all the time, so that naturally moistens down your paint a little bit more, so it's not as thick. But if you're not using the wet palette, just put a little bit of water in with your normal paint. I will do a video at some point on wet palettes, I'm sure, so if you want that, drop a link down below. Now we're onto a metallic stage. You traditionally wouldn't water metallics down, but I do quite often just drop this onto the wet palette anyway, because if you work off it quickly, it doesn't water it down and thin it down too much. Now I'm doing this on all the trim, on all the kind of Baroque detail, and you see there I've just managed to put some metallic onto the green. So got another brush, wet it quickly, and just rubbing that metallic off. When you're going through the paint stages, it's really important to try and be as neat as you possibly can. Correct the mistakes as you go in if you notice them, because that makes it a lot easier at the end and a lot quicker to sort of tidy up. And I always do a tidy up session at the end where I go around the model and just check for any mistakes. And that's another advantage of a wet palette. You've got those paints available. Now, I don't necessarily show the correcting area. Now, talking about correcting mistakes, here's something I did. Doing the bases, if you watch that base video, I talk about putting bubbles in. And I completely forgot. And then I realised when I'm half through the paint scheme and thought, right, I'll do it. I'll get these bubbles put on. So, you know, if you notice that mistake, you can go back in time and correct it. That's no problem. Now, what I'm doing here is just I've glued little milliput balls down. And this represents the air bubbles coming out of the Nurgle goop we're going to put on at the end. Now, I've put extra super glue on. I'm just using a cocktail stick with a little bit of paint on the end to kind of mix in with that super glue and almost make little waves and ripples around that milliput bubble just as you go. So just showing you there, you can get halfway through a paint scheme, realise you've forgotten something, go back and do it. Not a problem. Now, I'm using purple here to tie the knights into my army colour scheme. So I'm using purple on the banners that hang between the legs of these knights. And you could use anything you want. These can look quite nice done in flesh. I've seen them on flesh coloured with blood and gore coming off them. That looks kind of cool, but for me, I want them to look like, you know, tabard cloth rather than it being like a gory flesh, but whatever you want to go for on this. Now, what I don't show on the video is me putting transfers onto the model. The tabards are great little places to put transfers on that you get with the kit. Now, I put one on the big knight's tabard, and I also put one on the big knight's shield later on. I don't show it on the video, but I do have, again, another video of putting transfers on and how to make transfers look cool, and you'll see these things appear. Now, you could use lots of those transfers on that tabard. I use a couple, but definitely very nice. Now, moving on to the birds that are on top of the abominant, I'm just taking a couple of different brown colours, working on all the cloth and also onto the wood. You could use lots and lots of multiple different colours on here, especially if you're doing a Zinch one. You'd want to maybe do, you know, real bright colours, but I'm keeping them very muted in keeping with the kind of Nurgle tone. A real nice dark brown for the wood and an even darker black brown for the feathers. There's a lot of bone on these models, or the larger model, particularly skulls and things, but what is also nice is the War Dog face plate is sort of a bone skull, so I'm doing that onto there. You'll see on the other War Dog I've used a metallic skull plate, so whatever takes your fancy. Now, when you're painting the bone colour on, you will need to do multiple layers on this because it is, again, very thin. Now, the cables I've kept, again, very muted. You'll notice I'm doing a very muted colour scheme a lot of times, so I'm using just a bad and black and painting not all, but most of the cables across the model in its bad and black colour. I do use a little bit of red later on, which you won't see onto some of the cables. Now, you could, again, do multiple colours. For me, particularly with Nurgle, I want to keep it fairly muted. Now, I apologise for some of the camera angles we're getting here. I didn't notice when I was filming it, but I've ended up blocking a lot of the paintbrushes, so there'll be some weird camera angles for this next section. I mounted my phone wrong on its mounting, and I've had to screen the other way. As you can see here, I'm focusing on my hand rather than the actual rockets I'm painting. So a little bit of red into the rockets. You can also drop these into the eyes of the war dogs and onto any cables if you wanted to pick them up and keep them, you know, as red. Now we are on to really the last details here. So I'm taking a bit of blue and I'm dropping that into what looks like the vision port in the pilot's section there. Again, any colour you want to do, or you could leave them silver, would be absolutely fine. Detailing that same blue, and that's part of the reason why I picked blue, onto the plasma kind of chamber of that Volkite combustor, working on there. But again, I've seen some very nice effects of plasma being done orange or red or really bright green, whatever takes your choice. But I like the mix of that blue. Now the electro scourge that's on the arm would be crackling with electrical energy in reality, so I've decided to just dry brush this with the blue again. Time saving, using the same colour in multiple places, but also looks pretty cool. You can see just in the bottom of the frame there, I've got a bit of paper that I'm rubbing most of the blue off, and just a quick dry brush over a lot of that kind of armature, just to give that gentle effect of electricity. I'm taking yellow and I'm dropping it onto the sort of pustule bits on there. There's no obvious kind of bursting out nurgly on here, but there are little lumps across the armour panels that look like where chaos stuff is about to pop out. And then when I've drilled those bullet holes into the armour, I'm just putting yellow there as well. Now this is where we're going to put some Nurgle rot effect later, and that base coat of yellow just helps the Nurgle's rot to pop a little bit more. You'll see the same thing onto the base there, which I've not shown, of just tying that together. Now my favourite wash, this is a Vallejo sepia wash, a nice dirty mucky ink wash. It can be slapped all over all the models and the bases. You can use any kind of sepia wash you want, but I think the Vallejo one has got that extra level of dirtiness. You can see this is what it looks like after we've done that wash layer. Real nice, real grimy, real mucky. If you were into the proper grimdark style of painting, which is very popular at the moment, you could even just leave it at this stage and you'd be fine. But now I'm going to go over all the previous colours we've used and just do the next layers. You can see I'm starting on the green again, going through the same process I've done already. Now when we paint, we don't want to completely cover all the areas. You want to be leaving that wash showing in the cracks, near the armour panels, in the areas where the paint itself has cracked. I'm going to show you a little bit closer up. I've already done the left part of this armour panel. Now we're not putting thick layers on. What we're trying to do is almost glaze over the armour. You can see there it's fairly thin, so we're sort of putting that over. We want some of this brown to show through. We don't want to take this kind of glaze area right up to the edges, so you can see there's a nice dark brown at the edge, slightly lighter onto the armour panels, and I've not gone anywhere near the inside of the cracked armour you can see there. So it's a bit of artistry, this kind. You've got to put it on, kind of move the paint around. You might put it on slightly thicker on some panels if you want some panels looking brighter. I do find that doing this effect on a foot trooper, you would be painting on the paint now fairly thick, because the panels are fairly small, so the detail comes into the shading and the edge highlighting. Here, because it's a very large flattish panel, you want the gradations and the tones of the paint to come through on a flat panel. To do that, you're almost doing this kind of almost a glaze, almost a wash kind of format that we're going on to. So a little bit of artistry, like I said. It does look like now you can see the paint strokes showing. When it dries, you won't, because again, it's fairly thin how the paint has gone on. So again, just play. I will do at some point a video showing all the different paint techniques I do talk about, but have a go. Now moving on to the rest of the model, we're going through in a similar sort of vein we've just done on the armour panels, but this is with normally watered paint. You're not doing a glaze or anything here, and we're dropping all the paint now onto the raised areas. Sometimes you might want to go on some of the flat areas. It's, you know, to yourself what you want the final effect to look like. But we're doing the highlight layer now, so we're going over and we want this on the raised areas. The cracks would need to be left with the washing, and that's your darkest area, those cracked areas. And when you raise up to the flat panels, you've got the wash over, but it'll be slightly lighter. And then what you're doing now is putting the colour on the raised areas, and that will give you your kind of third or almost fourth colour. So now we're working on the cloth. You can see the transfers that we've put on. Again, we're taking that purple and we are just putting it on the raised folds of the cloth, leaving the wash in the deep cracks, the wash over the normal in the flattish areas, and then the top areas we're putting that purple on. It'll give you 3 or 4 colours. Now working on the transfers, I'm taking the bone colour that we've used already and painting that onto the white area of the transfer, just to try and make the transfer blend in and look a bit more like we properly painted it. As I said before, I've done a video on making transfers look really cool on models and making them really blend in, and I'll drop that down below. And that actually is me painting the Canis Rex model, so another knight model if that's what you're interested in. So final highlights now onto the bone. You can see there onto the ridges, and we're not dry dry brushing, we are edge highlighting, moving along the direction of these ridges, just using the very side of the paintbrush to just deposit this paint on top of the super raised areas, and that's really good. Again, you can do this again with the Death Guard green after you've done the wash stage to really make it pop. Onto the red, you can see just onto some certain patches in the flat bits, onto the edges, again edge highlighting, and that really is working through the details. Now we move on to the birds that are on there, trying to get an angle so you can actually see. Just doing the same process with the wood, same process with the feathers. Now I've just gone back and used the same colours I've already used, and I think it gives a nice effect onto it. You could use a lighter brown, lighter whatever, and go up stages, but I like Nurgle, particularly fairly muted. Now, we haven't done anything with the metal work on the models at all, and I'm not doing anything on the metal work around the legs or around the back or anything like that, but I'm just taking some to drop it onto the chains to lift it up. I think the metal work on the rest of the model is perfectly fine, just with the spray and just with the wash that we've done on, hence the massive time saving of doing these with metallic spray. Now on to the best Nurgle paint, Nurgle's Rot. Taking this onto the basing you've seen there, and then dropping this into the areas of the model where there's a bullet mark, it's cracked, or there's like a bit of pustule, that kind of thing, or you can just use it to cover up painting mistakes. Now normally here I'd use Nailac oxide and make a kind of oxidized brass effect, and you drop that onto the rivets and that kind of thing in this model. I've chosen not to do this on these models because for some reason I don't think they need it. Whether we've used a couple more colours than my other knights or whatever, but I've just decided not to do that on this model. But this would be an optional stage you could do, and I have done on my other models. And a similar thing with doing my 3-stage wash for what I normally do on the vents and melter guns if we've done that. And normally I do a 3-stage wash, and I'm just showing you doing the first of that stage, painting on a Druchii Violet. Now I only use 2 stages on this model, and I don't quite know why, but I didn't feel that it needed my normal 3 stages. And what I've done is I've just put the Druchii Violet on the very top of the vents on all 3 of the models, and then finished it off after that with a little bit of Drakenhof Nightshade, but not as much as I would normally do. And that's the paint scheme. So obviously I varnished them after that, but that's a separate thing. So back onto those original spinning shots. Again, I think a really nice effect. They're going to really blend in well with my Nurgle knights that I've done so far, but I haven't done the demonic possession parts, I haven't done the mutations and those kind of things that I've done on the rest of my Nurgle force. So these will be a slightly standout unit that's going to go with the rest of my Nurgle army, and I think particularly fit in quite well. So if you liked that, like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. Check out my videos for all the other stuff, and hopefully I will see you again soon.